The Ozark Mountains, near the town of Jasper, Arkansas. The morning sun slowly spreads across the mist drifting through the trees, turning the quiet forest into a place that feels almost untouched by time. The air is cool, the trails are empty, and retired police officer James Smith believes this walk will be just like every other peaceful morning he has spent in these mountains. But then a thin Labradoodle bursts from the trees and begins barking directly at him. Not once, not twice, over and over again. The dog runs a few steps into the forest, then stops, turns back, and barks again, as if urgently begging him to follow. James has seen many strange things in 30 years as a police officer, but he has never seen a dog try so desperately to lead a human somewhere. And within minutes, that frantic barking will lead him to a hidden hole deep in the forest, where 3 tiny puppies are trapped with no way out. Before we begin, do you have a dog of your own? Drop your answer in the comments. I'd love to know who's watching alongside their furry best friend. And if you believe that every animal deserves a loving home, not loneliness, hit that subscribe button, because what you're about to hear might just change how you see the world. This story takes place at the edge of the Ozark Mountains near Jasper, Arkansas, during a cool autumn morning just after sunrise. A thin layer of mist drifts between the tall oak trees, and the forest air carries the quiet scent of damp earth and fallen leaves. The day has only just begun, and the trails are nearly empty. James Smith walked slowly along a narrow dirt path that curved through the woods. At 64 years old, James was a retired Arkansas State police officer, a man who had spent more than 3 decades working patrols, investigations, and rural response calls across the state. He had been born and raised in Arkansas and had lived most of his life around these mountains. Since retiring, James had moved into a small wooden cabin near the forest outside Jasper. The cabin stood alone at the edge of the woods, surrounded by tall trees and quiet hills. A few years earlier, James had lost his wife after a long illness. The silence of the mountains had slowly become his companion. Each morning he followed the same routine: a thermos of coffee, a small backpack, and a walk through the trails where he had installed a few wildlife cameras to observe deer, black bears, and other animals that wandered through the Ozarks. James preferred these quiet mornings. The forest never asked questions and never judged the past. He stepped carefully over a fallen branch and paused for a moment to listen to the forest. Birds were beginning their morning calls, and somewhere deeper in the woods, a woodpecker tapped against an old tree. Then, suddenly, a sharp bark echoed through the trees. James stopped. Another bark followed, then another. He turned slowly toward the sound. From a cluster of low bushes along the trail, a cream-colored Labradoodle burst into view. The dog was medium-sized, its curly coat dusty and tangled, as if it had been living outdoors for some time. The dog ran straight toward James. Then it stopped a few feet away and began barking loudly. Not aggressive, not threatening, but urgent. James raised an eyebrow. "Easy there," he murmured calmly, using the steady voice he had used for years during police work.
What's wrong?
The dog barked again. Then suddenly it turned and ran several yards toward the forest.
Come here, girl.
It stopped, turned around, and barked again.
Lead the way.
James stood still, watching carefully. The dog repeated the motion. Run forward, look back, bark. Run again, look back, bark louder. James had worked enough years in law enforcement to recognize unusual behavior quickly. Stray dogs often approached humans looking for food, but this was different. This animal wasn't asking for something. It was trying to show him something. The dog barked again, pacing nervously, its tail low but moving anxiously.
Something is definitely wrong.
Then it ran deeper toward the trees and stopped again, staring straight at him. For a moment, James considered the possibility that the dog belonged to a nearby farm. Several ranches sat scattered around the outskirts of Jasper. And recently, Sheriff Mark Hinson, the county sheriff of Newton County, had mentioned seeing signs of stray dogs wandering the forest. Mark Hinson was 57 years old, a lifelong Arkansas resident and a calm, practical man who had worked with James many times during his police career. According to Mark, a few abandoned animals had been spotted deeper in the woods. James studied the dog again. Its barking grew louder, more desperate. That was when something inside James shifted. 30 years as a police officer had trained him to notice small signals: fear in a voice, urgency in a gesture, the silent message behind behavior that most people ignored. And right now, everything about this dog said one thing: help. The Labradoodle barked once more, then spun around and ran into the forest again.
What is it? What do you see?
But this time, it didn't disappear. It stopped about 20 yards away and waited, watching him. James sighed quietly and adjusted the strap of his backpack. "Well," he muttered to himself, "I suppose we'll see where you're going." The dog barked again, almost as if it understood.
What are you waiting for?
And without another moment of hesitation, James Smith stepped off the trail and followed it into the woods.
Sonny.
Sex 0.5. James Smith stepped off the narrow trail and followed the cream-colored Labradoodle deeper into the woods.
What's wrong, Sonny?
The dog moved quickly, but not recklessly, pausing every few seconds to look back and make sure the older man was still behind her. Each time their eyes met, she barked again, short, urgent bursts that carried a tone James had learned long ago to recognize: distress. His boots sank slightly into the damp soil as he walked down the slope, pushing past low branches and stepping carefully over fallen logs. Even after retirement, the habits of a career police officer remained with him.
Sonny, what is it?
He watched the ground, read the path ahead,
Lead the way.
and kept his breathing steady. The dog's behavior was too purposeful to ignore. For nearly 10 minutes, they moved through thicker parts of the Ozark forest. The ground became steeper and slick with layers of old leaves pressed into the soil by months of
Are
rain.
you asking for time to move, boy?
James adjusted the strap of his backpack as he descended a shallow ridge. The Labradoodle suddenly slowed and stopped near a patch of uneven ground. Her barking changed immediately. It became louder, sharper, and far more frantic.
Sonny, wait.
She began running in tight circles around a sunken area in the forest floor.
Keep going,
James
Sonny.
stopped a few steps away and studied the scene. At first, he saw nothing unusual, just a depression in the earth, surrounded by exposed tree roots and loose soil. But the dog's behavior told him something was wrong. She barked down toward the ground,
Sonny,
then
what is
looked
it?
at him
Look down.
again, whining softly between barks.
You want me to look that way? Okay.
James stepped closer.
You see
Then he
that,
heard it.
boy?
A faint sound, small and strained. A whimper.
Those eyes.
He leaned forward, peering over the edge of the depression. The ground dropped sharply into what looked like a deep collapse in the soil, perhaps the result of erosion or a landslide from months earlier.
Sonny, what is it?
At the bottom of the pit, about 3 meters down, 3 tiny Labradoodle puppies scrambled helplessly against the steep dirt wall. Their curly coats were muddy and damp. Each time one of them tried to climb, its paws slid backward down the wet soil. They tumbled against each other, yelping weakly as they tried again and again to reach the top. James felt his chest tighten. The mother dog barked loudly toward the pit again, then turned to him. Her eyes held a pleading urgency that required no explanation. "They're yours, aren't they?" James murmured quietly. The dog moved closer to the edge, but stopped herself from jumping in, pacing nervously along the rim. Every instinct in her body seemed to be pulling her toward the puppies, yet she clearly understood the danger of the drop. James crouched beside the edge and studied the pit more carefully. The walls were steep and slick. Even an adult dog would struggle to climb out, let alone 3 young puppies. He stood slowly and scanned the surrounding area. Years of investigative work had trained him to observe details most people overlooked. Just a few yards away, partially hidden beneath fallen leaves and grass, he noticed something that didn't belong in a remote stretch of forest. Faint tire tracks. They were old but still visible in the soft soil of a narrow dirt clearing nearby. The tracks suggested a small vehicle, perhaps a pickup truck, had once driven into the woods and stopped not far from this spot. James frowned.
We're almost there.
"Someone brought you out here," he said quietly, more to himself than to the dog. The Labradoodle barked again, pacing faster now. James looked back down into the pit. The puppies were growing weaker with every failed attempt to climb. Another soft whimper echoed upward.
Did you find something?
He straightened slowly and glanced toward the western sky through the gaps in the trees.
I'll get him.
Thick gray clouds were beginning to gather beyond the ridge. The air carried that faint heaviness that often came before autumn rainstorms in the Ozarks.
Come here.
If rain came soon, the loose soil inside the pit would turn slicker than ice, and those puppies would have no chance of climbing out. The hole would become a trap.
Whimpers.
James exhaled slowly. The mother dog stopped pacing and stood beside him
What
again.
is it?
Her breathing was quick, and her eyes never left his face. It was the same look James had seen many times in people during emergencies. Hope mixed with fear.
Sonny,
She had done the only thing she could think of.
I think it's coming.
She had
from
found a
over here.
human, and she had led him here.
I don't see anything.
James looked once more into the pit, then back at the anxious dog beside him. "Well," he said quietly, already knowing what he had to do, "we'd better figure out how to get them out of there." The Labradoodle gave one sharp bark, as if she understood.
Come on, Sonny.
Sex 0.5. James Smith remained standing at the edge of the pit for a few seconds,
Stay put.
studying the
All right, little
depth
fellas,
and
hang
the
on.
steep
I
slope
gotcha.
of the dirt
Just
walls.
a little bit closer.
The
Come on,
3
Sonny.
small Labradoodle puppies continued to whimper
Sonny.
below, slipping helplessly each time
Okay,
they
good.
tried to
Take it
climb.
easy.
The mother dog
Back.
paced beside
Right
him,
here.
her breathing fast, but she did not bark
All right,
anymore.
Sonny.
It was as if she understood that the moment for noise
Stay
had
close.
passed, and now only action mattered.
Whimpers and low barks.
James slowly set his
All
backpack
right,
on the
Sonny, stay
ground.
back.
He had learned long ago during his years in the Arkansas State Police
Keep your eyes
that
peeled, boy.
hesitation during a rescue
Something's
could
not
cost
right out
precious
here.
time. When accidents happened on rural roads or during storm emergencies,
Did you see that
decisions
truck?
had to be made quickly and carefully. He opened the backpack and pulled out a coiled rope, something he always carried during long walks through the
Someone must have
mountains.
brought you out. I think
The
that
rope
will
was
pull
sturdy
me.
but worn from years of use.
All right,
He
Sonny,
glanced around the
set this
clearing
up.
until he found a thick oak tree growing close enough to the pit to serve as an anchor.
I'm coming.
Working calmly, James wrapped the
All right,
rope
Sonny.
around the trunk several
This should hold.
times and tied a secure knot. The movements came naturally to him. During his police career, he had often practiced rope work for search and rescue operations, especially in rough terrain.
All right, little ones. All
The
right,
mother
Sonny.
dog watched every motion. Her body was tense, but she did not interfere. She simply stood a few steps away,
Sonny, stay
eyes
back.
fixed on the hole where her puppies
Easy,
were
girl.
trapped. James lowered the rope carefully over the edge and tested its
Stay right
strength
there,
with a
okay?
firm pull. Then he
All right,
swung
little
his
fella, come on
legs
in.
over the
Stay
side
put.
of the pit and began descending slowly,
I'll be back up
bracing
soon.
his boots against the damp soil. The puppies immediately reacted. At first they
Okay, little
panicked.
guys. I
One of them
gotcha.
yelped and tried to
Don't be
scramble
scared,
away as the
puppies.
tall human figure dropped toward them. But James kept his voice calm and steady. "Easy now. Easy," he said softly. The tone he used was the same one he had used when comforting frightened victims during roadside crashes many years ago.
Damn it. Hold
The
tight.
puppies hesitated, watching him with wide, uncertain eyes. His boots touched the bottom of the pit, and he crouched slowly so he would not appear threatening. They could smell the scent of earth, leather, and coffee from his thermos. More importantly,
Don't be
they
scared,
sensed that
puppies.
he meant no harm.
Hold tight.
One of the puppies crept closer first.
Almost
The
there.
other two followed after a moment, their small tails wagging nervously. "That's right,"
Hold
James
tight, little
murmured
one.
gently.
We're almost
"We're
there.
going to get you out of here." He lifted the smallest puppy first.
Almost there, little
Its
one.
paws were
We're
muddy
safe.
and cold,
Oh, Sonny,
and
you
its body
found her.
trembled
Yes,
slightly.
she's okay.
Carefully holding the rope with
Hold
one
tight,
hand,
little one.
he
We're
climbed
almost
upward,
there.
pushing his boots against the dirt wall while
Almost there,
gripping the
big guy.
rope tightly.
Soft puppy whimper.
Halfway up the pit, the
Just a
puppy
little further.
wriggled unexpectedly.
Soft pants. Almost there, little guy.
For a brief second,
Soft
it
puppy.
slipped.
Came back.
James tightened his grip immediately and pulled the little dog securely against his chest.
It's okay now.
"Not today, little one," he said quietly.
Gotcha.
Moments later, he reached the
Almost there.
top and placed the puppy
Almost there,
gently
little
on
one.
solid
We're
ground.
safe.
The mother dog rushed forward at
Oh,
once,
Sonny, you
sniffing
found
and
her.
licking the
Yes,
puppy's
she's
face
okay.
with urgent relief.
All right, old girl, I'm going in. Stay
James
put.
lowered himself back down the rope. The second puppy came up more easily, and the third followed soon after. By the time he climbed out of the pit for the final time,
They're in
his
there.
arms and
We have to
legs
find a
were
way to get 'em
streaked
out.
with dirt
Don't
and
worry,
sweat.
girl, we'll get 'em. Woof.
The moment the last puppy touched the ground, the mother dog moved quickly
Sonny, you
between
found
them,
her.
Yes,
licking each of their
okay.
faces and nudging them gently,
All right, so
as if counting them one by one.
Just rest now.
All three puppies pressed close to her. James stepped back a few feet and sat
We're
down
all
heavily
safe
on the
now.
ground. His chest rose and fell as he caught his breath.
we made it.
For a moment, no one moved.
Just rest now.
The three puppies gathered near their mother, while she stood protectively beside them. Then,
Sonny,
slowly,
looks like the place.
the Labradoodle turned her head and looked
We're
at
all safe
James.
now.
There was no fear in her eyes now, only quiet
We
relief.
made it. We're coming to get
James
you
wiped a
out.
bit of dirt from his hands and let out a tired breath. The rescue had
Sorry,
gone
Sonny, I
well,
didn't know he'd do this.
but as he looked at the small family standing together in the
Almost there,
clearing,
little one.
another
Safe.
thought settled into his mind.
Oh, Sonny, you found
They were
her.
safe now,
Yes, she's okay.
but the truth remained. These four dogs still had nowhere to go. Sex. James Smith remained seated on the ground for a moment after catching his breath,
Look at him
watching the
go.
small family of dogs
You're a
gathered
good
together.
mama.
The three puppies pressed close to their mother, their tails wagging with renewed energy now that they were free. The Labradoodle stood protectively beside them, occasionally glancing toward James, as if trying to understand what would happen next. James slowly rose to his feet,
Can't survive out
brushed the
here.
dirt from his hands, and studied the dogs
Don't worry, I'll
again.
take care of you. All right,
Leaving
girl,
them in the
let's get
forest
to
was not an option. The tire tracks he had seen earlier
them
told
go.
him enough. Someone had likely abandoned them here, and without
Look
help,
at these little
they would not
guys.
last long in the wild. "Looks like you're coming with me," he said quietly.
Good
The
girl,
mother
Sonny.
dog
Let's keep
watched him
moving, kids.
carefully, but did not resist
Yep.
as he began guiding the small
Time to
group
head home.
toward the path. The puppies followed
Good girl,
naturally,
Sonny. Let's keep
stumbling
moving,
along
kids.
behind her.
Yep.
After a slow
All right, little
walk
ones.
back through the forest, James reached his old
you go,
pickup
safe and
truck
sound.
parked near the trail entrance.
Good
He opened
boy,
the back
Sonny.
door and gently helped
All
the
right, Sonny.
puppies climb inside,
In you go.
while the mother dog hesitated for only a moment before
Good
jumping in
girl.
after them.
Hi, puppies.
Nearly an hour later, James drove into the town of Harrison, Arkansas, and pulled into the gravel lot of Pine Ridge Animal Shelter. The modest building served as the primary rescue center for Newton and Boone County animals that had been abandoned or lost.
All right,
Inside the
little
shelter worked Linda Parker, a 44-year-old woman with a calm voice and practical manner. Linda had grown up on a small farm outside Harrison and had spent most of her adult life rescuing and caring for stray animals brought in from across the region.
forest was dense, but we
She stepped
found it.
forward
She
from
was
behind the
protecting
front
these little
desk when
ones.
James entered with the puppies.
Well,
"Well, looks like you found yourself quite a morning," she said with a gentle
On
smile.
my way. What's the-
James explained what had happened in the forest while Linda knelt to examine the dogs. She nodded slowly, already accustomed to stories of abandoned animals. A few minutes later, she called for the shelter's veterinarian, Dr. Ethan Brooks, a 50-year-old veterinarian who had worked with the shelter for over 2 decades, arrived from the examination room. Ethan had once run a larger veterinary clinic in Fayetteville, but chose later in life to focus on rural rescue work. He crouched beside the puppies, checking their paws, eyes, and breathing, while speaking in a calm, reassuring tone. After several minutes of examination, Dr. Brooks looked up at James and Linda. "No microchips," he said first. He continued carefully checking each puppy before adding, "They're a little underweight, but otherwise healthy. Mild malnutrition, nothing severe. My guess is they've been surviving on very little food." Linda nodded. "And judging by where you found them, I'd say someone left them out there." The shelter staff prepared a small kennel area for the family of dogs, while Dr. Brooks cleaned their paws and gave them basic treatment. Later that afternoon, Linda posted notices through the shelter's website and local bulletin boards, announcing that 4 Labradoodles had been found near the Ozark forest outside Jasper. The message invited any potential owner to come forward, and also opened applications for possible adopters. Over the following weeks, James found himself returning to the shelter regularly. At first, he claimed he only wanted to check on the rescue case he had brought in, but Linda quickly noticed something else. Each time James walked through the gate, the 3 puppies immediately rushed toward the front of their enclosure, wagging their tails with excited energy. The mother dog followed close behind them. James began helping around the shelter during his visits. He repaired sections of an aging wooden fence that had begun leaning after a storm, and sometimes he helped carry bags of feed from the supply shed. It gave him something to do during the quiet days of retirement. Meanwhile, the puppies began growing stronger and healthier. Their coats became cleaner and fuller, and their playful energy filled the shelter yard whenever they were allowed outside. Yet one small pattern never changed. Whenever James arrived, the puppies always ran straight toward him first. 2 months passed quietly after the rescue. James Smith had not planned to become part of the daily rhythm at Pine Ridge Animal Shelter. Yet somehow, the place had slowly worked its way into his routine. Retirement had already taught him that long days could stretch endlessly if a man had nothing meaningful to do. Helping at the shelter gave him a reason to drive into Harrison every week. The Labradoodle family had settled in well. The 3 puppies had grown noticeably larger during those weeks. Their coats were cleaner, their bodies stronger, and their playful energy filled the exercise yard whenever Linda allowed them outside. The mother dog remained calm and watchful, always staying close to her pups, but slowly learning that the shelter was a safe place. Despite the notices posted across Harrison and surrounding towns, no one ever came forward claiming to be their owner. Linda Parker checked the shelter records several times, hoping someone might call. But the phone remained quiet. Applications for adoption did come in occasionally, but there was always the same complication. Families were willing to adopt 1 puppy, sometimes 2, but no one was prepared to take all 4 dogs together. Linda was reluctant to separate them so quickly after what they had already endured. One cold afternoon in early winter, James pulled his old pickup truck into the gravel lot of Pine Ridge Animal Shelter once again. The sky had turned gray that day, and the air carried the sharp chill that signaled the coming of December. James stepped inside the shelter building, brushing a bit of dust from his jacket. He had barely taken 2 steps into the hallway when it happened. From the kennel area came the sudden sound of excited barking. 3 small shapes burst forward at once. The Labradoodle puppies ran straight toward him, their tails wagging wildly as their paws scrambled against the floor. Within seconds, they were circling around his boots, jumping and nudging his legs with overwhelming enthusiasm. "Well now," James said with a quiet laugh, trying to steady himself as the puppies pushed against him. One of them rose on its hind legs and pawed at his jacket. Another pressed its nose against his hand. The third ran a small circle around his legs before returning to join the others. Behind them, the mother dog walked forward more calmly.
Little troublemakers.
She stopped in front of James and gently rested her head against his hand.
Oh, you are too cute.
James froze for a moment.
Sonny. Good girl.
It was a simple gesture,
Look at all my
but the trust in
puppies.
that movement carried a weight he had not expected. From the office doorway,
Sonny.
Linda Parker leaned against the wall, watching the scene with an amused smile. "I've been waiting to see how long it would take," she said. James looked up, puzzled. Waiting for what?
They're a playful bunch.
Linda stepped closer and folded her arms. For them to make up their minds.
They need a home just like yours.
James glanced down at the
You're
puppies
safe
still
now.
pressing around his boots. "They're just excited to see someone familiar," he replied.
Yes, you are.
Linda shook her head. "No," she said gently. "They're excited to see you." She nodded toward the small group gathered at his feet. "I think they've already chosen their owner." James gave a quiet chuckle and shook his head slowly. "Linda, I'm 64 years old," he said. "A man my age probably shouldn't be taking on 4 dogs."
Sonny.
The puppies did not appear interested in his argument. One of them suddenly leaned down and grabbed the lace of his boot with its tiny teeth, tugging lightly before letting go. James stared down at the little dog. The motion triggered a sudden memory in his mind, the frantic moment in the forest when the mother dog had barked and the puppies had struggled inside that deep hole. The same determined little pull,
Thanks.
as if asking him to follow. The room grew quiet. James slowly knelt down so he was eye level with the puppies. They immediately crowded
Hello there,
closer,
you little ones.
tails wagging so hard their entire bodies swayed. For a long moment, he simply
Well,
looked
hello
at
there,
them.
little ones. Oh, you're all so
30 years of
fluffy.
police work had taught him how to read people. Sometimes it had taught him how to read animals, too.
You little troublemakers.
And right now, the message from the small family standing in front of him was
Oh,
unmistakable.
you are too cute.
They trusted him.
Come here, Sonny.
They remembered him.
Good girl.
And somehow,
Look at all my
they
puppies.
believed they belonged with
I
him.
love you.
James let out a
Good
slow
girl,
breath.
Sonny.
Something inside the heart of the retired police officer softened in a way he had not expected. Sex 0.5. The quiet moment in the shelter hallway lingered in James Smith's mind long after he left that afternoon. The 3 Labradoodle puppies had eventually been guided back into their enclosure, though they had clearly not been happy about it.
I never forgot that.
Even as Linda Parker closed the
Smallest
gate,
one of the lot.
their bright eyes followed James as he walked toward the exit.
Yeah, they all are here.
For several days afterward, the thought stayed with him. He found himself remembering the way the smallest puppy had tugged gently at his bootlace, just as it had done during the desperate rescue in the forest.
How can I help you today?
It was a simple gesture,
I'm here to
but
protect
somehow it
you.
felt like a reminder, almost a message that the story between them had not truly ended yet. A week later, James drove back to Pine Ridge Animal Shelter.
Hello there. Look at you.
This time, he did not come simply to check on the dogs. Linda Parker was standing behind the front desk when he entered. She looked up with a knowing expression, as if she had already guessed why he had returned. "Well," she said with a warm smile, "I was wondering when you might come back."
Yes, you're
James
Mabel.
gave a small nod and placed his hat on the
All
counter.
right, Sonny. Look at him
"I
go.
suppose it's time we finish what we started," he said. Linda slid a set of papers across the desk. The documents were adoption forms that the shelter used whenever an animal found a permanent home.
They love you.
James read through them slowly. He had signed many official documents during his career in law enforcement, but this one somehow felt different. When he finally finished, he picked up the pen and signed his name,
Isn't it?
James
They're
Smith.
growing up so fast.
A few minutes later, the kennel door
I would
opened.
trade this for the world.
The puppies came running first, their paws tapping quickly across the floor, as if they had been waiting for this moment.
Maybe I
The
will.
mother dog followed more calmly, her tail swaying
You are
gently
safe
behind
here,
her.
Sonny. Thank you, Linda.
Linda laughed
Just getting them
softly.
settled.
"Looks like they knew before we did."
Smallest one
The
of
ride
lot.
back to James's cabin was far louder than the quiet trip he had taken the first day he visited the shelter. The puppies explored every corner of the truck's back seat, occasionally climbing over one another as they tried to look out the windows. Their mother remained steady beside them, watching everything with quiet attention. When they finally arrived at the small wooden cabin near the Ozark forest, James opened the truck door and stepped aside. The puppies burst out first, racing across the yard with playful excitement. James leaned against the truck door and watched them for a moment before turning his attention to the mother dog, who had stepped down more carefully. "Well," he said thoughtfully, "I suppose we should give you all proper names." He crouched down beside them as the puppies gathered around his boots again. The mother dog had proven herself brave and steady during the rescue, so James decided to name her Sunny, a quiet tribute to the warmth she had brought back into his otherwise quiet life. The smallest puppy, the one who had tugged at his shoelace, became Scout because of its curious and adventurous spirit. The second puppy, slightly calmer but always attentive, became River. The third, energetic and quick to chase every moving leaf, became Maple. Life at the cabin changed quickly after that. The once silent house now echoed with the sound of paws running across the wooden floor and playful barking from the yard. Mornings became livelier as James prepared coffee while the puppies explored every corner of their new home. Not long after the adoption, Sheriff Mark Henson, the 57-year-old county sheriff who had known James for years, began stopping by the cabin from time to time. Mark was a broad-shouldered man with a relaxed manner and a long history of working law enforcement in Newton County. Whenever he visited, he brought fresh coffee or supplies from town, and the puppies greeted him like an old friend. "Looks like retirement finally got busy," Mark joked during one visit as the puppies circled his boots. James simply smiled. Soon another routine formed. Each morning, James walked the familiar trails of the Ozark forest again. But this time, he was no longer alone. Scout, River, and Maple ran ahead along the path, while Sunny stayed close beside him, moving with the calm alertness of a quiet guardian. James noticed that she rarely wandered far. She always kept him within sight, as if she still remembered the moment when a human stranger had followed her desperate barking into the forest and changed everything. And in return, James realized something simple but powerful. Sometimes the lives we rescue quietly rescue us right back. One quiet afternoon, James stood on his porch, watching Sunny and her 3 puppies run across the yard. The house that had once been silent was now filled with life again. And in that moment, James realized something simple but powerful. Animals do not forget. They remember the hands that saved them. They remember the hearts that protected them. Sunny trusted a stranger in the forest when her puppies needed help, and that trust changed everything. James rescued them that day, but in many ways, those dogs rescued him too. They brought purpose, companionship, and warmth back into a life that had once felt very lonely. Sometimes miracles do not arrive in dramatic ways. Sometimes they come quietly through loyalty, kindness, and the love of a faithful dog. Perhaps that is one of the ways God reminds us that compassion still matters. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who loves animals. Tell us in the comments if a dog has ever changed your life, and subscribe for more stories about the bond between humans and animals. May God bless everyone watching today, and if you believe kindness still makes the world better, you can write amen in the comments and share that hope with others.